So hi, welcome back to the next in our video series, Make It Your Own. And in this session, we're going to be exploring lesson 7 of .B. So just hi again to Richard, because Richard's been here with us throughout the whole piece. And also a really warm welcome to Hamish, who teaches in a school in the northeast of Scotland and is going to be sharing about the way that he's been delivering .B. I wonder if I could just start off by saying thank you to Hamish, because actually it was Hamish sharing with me that he taught .B over a whole year to his students that made me think about the fact that chunking .B or offering it in a different way fed into this idea about making it your own. So a massive thank you to you for that, Hamish, for whether that came out of what was offered to you at school or whether it was your own idea to do it that way. It was brilliant because it kind of sparked what we're doing now with this. But I'd be really curious to know how that went for you with teaching it over a whole year.
Yeah, thanks. To start with, I was offered one 50-minute period per week with these senior pupils, and there was 15 of them or so. And I was quite daunted, but I had only just recently taught to teach the .B, and it seemed to extend like essentially a 10-11 week course for a whole 35 weeks. It did seem a bit daunting, but it was amazing how the element of repetition was really actually useful, and kind of chunking it down and just be able to revisit the themes, but encouraging the intentions of having a beginner's mind and some other intentions just really made it real. And so it really, really did work. It actually became a joy. It became a bit of a club over the whole year. And I think it worked well, actually.
Right.
And so what was the feedback like, and kind of what was the impact different, do you think, from teaching it in a shorter period?
I think it was, because I think they had a chance to embed the practice, and by having maybe even 2 or 3 weeks to do lesson, it gives you time to just really practice a bit more deeply, and for them, the ones who were practicing at home, to give it a go, and to just, before they went into the next theme, they'd be able to focus more and more aware of their thoughts or whatever. And I think that's repetition, if it was done with a beginner's mind and an openness and a bit of fun, doing something a little bit different each time, actually really worked. And I think by the end of the year, most of them had elements of a practice, I think, where it wasn't just a taster, they were able to continue it. And these were students who were about to leave school, so it was a good opportunity for them. I think it did work. It did extend, and the materials worked well. I think I was really pleased with how it went, and the feedback from them was very positive. I think there was quite a lot of developing of their own practice independently within that.
Yeah, that's really great to hear. I'm curious, actually, Richard, whether or not you've ever taught it over a long period of time, or if you've always taught it in that time frame.
I've not taught .B itself over more than 10 weeks. Well, actually, that's not strictly true. 12 weeks, because often your lessons get interrupted and you don't have them 1 week, or a lesson gets shortened. But I do teach an activity on a Wednesday afternoon, which often is all year, once a week. But that's not really .B. I mean, I do a bit of .B, but then I've got a whole different set of resources, I suppose, and approaches, which I've done over the years, which are now working, I think, reasonably well. It is fascinating, isn't it? All of these things.
Yeah. So anyway, coming back to what you were sharing there, Hamish, I know that you said that you bumped into a student who was talking about the fact that who'd been part of this group.
Yes. Yeah, it's happened a few times. I'll be in the supermarket with my wife, and she quite often tells the anecdote of me going to checkout and getting very engaged with the person at the checkout. And they say, "Oh, Mr. Keddie, I'm still doing that mindfulness, and I'm still practicing that." And it just fills my heart with joy. There is 2 or 3, 4 years after having done the course, they're still using it and still gaining from it. And I think that's the best feedback you can get, isn't it? You can write stuff down at the end of the whatever, or fill in a form then. But I think if you bump into someone several years down the line and they're still enthusing out about it and still obviously gaining and using it in the day-to-day to some extent, it's a marvelous. It's marvelous having been able to pass that gift onto someone else, you know, and it's just it's just great to see that in a young person.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to start talking about the thing that can sometimes be seen as being a little bit controversial, which is the exercise in the session. It's all around generating a little bit of stress for the students that you have there, and also obviously resourcing them then with practice to help them see how they can ground and work with something that feels a bit challenging. And thankfully this is so many lessons in that they've already got their kind of skills and their practice that can support and help them with this. So I'm just really interested to hear what you both do with that. So have you deviated from, we call it the shock ball practice, have you deviated from that?
Well, Richard told me that he tried to purchase a shock-a-tato, which I presently use, which is a version of a shock ball, except it gives mild and moderate or no electric shocks, depending on the setting. And yes, I try and bring in choice to it and give the element of decide whether, obviously, if the young people want to be engaged with the match of physically touching it or standing back or observing. And or sometimes I use it with the shock off as well, if that's a possibility. But most of them, it's such an exciting activity. It's full of joy and busyness. And I think even the ones who choose, and there are always one or two choose not to, even observing the others taking part and being encouraged to be aware of their own bodily sensations and their own reactions and then resourcing themselves and always bringing back and getting them involved in any dot Bs and resourcing. And it's such a fun lesson. And because I've already said I've been teaching it over the whole year, we do it several times. And even at the very end, bringing it together lesson, just before we all departed, I said, is there any practices you'd like to go over? And I said, oh yes, we want to do the shock-a-tato. And so we finished off the year with a ceremonial shock-a-tato. It's just bringing that fun into it. It's potential. And I'm aware there may be individuals who are not wanting, that are worried and frightened, and you have to manage that. And it's reassurance that they've got complete and utter choice as to what they do. But it's all about trying to observe what's going on within them and any thoughts, and rather than being forced to do anything, it's completely choice. But if you can reassure them that's the case, you can just go into the edge of difficulty, in and out of the edge of difficulty, and it's a marvelous activity. I really love it.
I think that's the key word, Faiy, that Hamish has just used, is fun. It's just a great fun lesson, you know. And you have to be, I think naturally any compassionate person would be trauma sensitive, and trauma sensitivity is put a name on something that I think one probably a lot of the time would instinctively do. But for the most part, they do love it. They have tremendous fun, to the point where I often get people wanting at the end of the class to stay behind just to feel what it would be like to get a shock if they hadn't had a shock during the actual game. I should say as well, I don't particularly like it. You know, I still don't particularly like it. It's a tiny shock. I still hold it very carefully outside of the shock pads. But I was going to say one thing I do to up the tension, if you like, and make it more theatrical, which works really well, is I close the blinds and turn the lights off, because then you've always got this little red light pinging. And then when it gives off its shock, it goes quite bright red, actually, in a dark room, which also gives people an opportunity to kind of step away a little bit more unnoticed if they're uncomfortable with it. So that's just a piece of theatre, but I find it quite effective.
Yeah, so lovely to hear. Actually, interesting for me to hear that you both use the shock ball or shock-tato and you've had really positive results, because that's also been my experience with it as well. Almost, I've taught in lots of different settings, lots of different age ranges of young people, and each time I come, and especially in more recent years, I've got into schools with this awareness of kind of, well, maybe that it won't be for this particular group, that they would like it. And every time they've absolutely loved it, and it's generated quite a lot of joy, actually, and excitement in the room, and sort of a bit of a buzz around it. And exactly the same as you, Richard, afterwards, if they've not had a shock, they might feel a bit disappointed and they want to see what it feels like. So yeah, so I have always been prepared. And just to say, there are other options. You can do one where you've put a sticker under someone's seat and you get them to share songs that they know the words to and say, oh, that's the person with the sticker. And you don't necessarily make them follow through with singing a song, obviously, but it's more about the noticing what happens when they're having a stress reaction, how they can steady and resource themselves using a .B or another practice if that kind of works better for them.
Did you share that you were sharing with us earlier, Faiy, which I hadn't heard of, the what's in the box idea? Because that's a fantastic fun thing as well.
Yeah, so we have an equivalent in .breathe, which is what's in the box, and we also use it in dots as well, where you have something in the box, and usually you sort of generate a bit of drama with that as well. It's like holes and safety and maybe bits of straw sticking out so nobody knows what's quite in the box. And we have a really lovely training colleague who I'm not going to name actually, but I'll just say that she puts a rat in her box, mechanical rat, I should say, a mechanical rat in her box that she moves by remote control. So this box also on its own looks like it's sort of wriggling and jiggling and things. And then the invitation is for young people to put their hands into the box. But I just think I love that because I think you kind of know the students that you're working with and what would work or not work with them. And clearly for her, with her students, they can handle the bit of fun that might be a rat in the box. So yeah, really, really love that particular idea.
Yeah, and actually I've got one more just to quickly share, is that on the very first .B training that we did, Chris O'Neill, who was responsible for a lot of the humour in .B and was a fantastic mindfulness teacher. On the very first one, we were teaching it, and it was me, Chris Cullen, and Chris O'Neill. And Chris brought out this cardboard box and said, "There's a spider in here. There's a poisonous spider in here," and we didn't know whether there was. It was fun being a participant for that time. And anyway, a long story short, he walks into the middle of the room and everyone sits out in a kind of horseshoe and places it in the middle, and then uncovers it, and there is indeed a poisonous spider. It's petrified in that perspex, but it's quite powerful. And actually, the other thing that was interesting, very first training, there was somebody who was genuinely arachnophobic, and that was interesting because again, that confronted us in a very helpful way, and I hope we managed it okay with that edge, because there will be people who will find this very difficult. So your skill as a mindfulness teacher in both giving them the opt-out but keeping them included is always, that edge as a teacher is always worked quite well by this lesson, I think.
Yeah, definitely. And I know, I mean, I was saying earlier about how, for me, compassion and this lesson around difficulty, that they work kind of together, really. So there's always, like you were saying, Hamish, about choice and just that idea of like showing people how they can use practice to help them cope with what's happening, but also always offering the choice to kind of, well, perhaps not today, as a way of opting out of these things. And in the circle, when we've done the shock ball, I've always said, that might be the kindest, best choice for you today. Maybe next week you'd want to have a go, especially like if they'd had a couple of chances to have a go, there might have been a day that felt like an okay day to try that. So just really trying to move away from the peer pressure thing and feeling like you've got to stick with it. It'll do it if you don't want to. But yeah, really lovely different experiences that we've had. I often talk about bringing awareness to other kind of things, like what's it like if you bring mindful awareness when you're in the middle of a rugby scrum, or what's it like when you're at the gym and you're on a running, you're on a machine, and what's it like when you're lifting weights. And I bring it back in this lesson because I say sometimes these are the moments when you can feel discomfort or other things, kind of like the intensity of an experience. How do you resource yourself in that moment? I often talk about the fact that people have this habit of playing music when they're at the gym or they're running, and it's like a way of blocking out what's happening in the body. So what's it like instead to tune in, to really notice, and how do you resource yourself? And absolutely, Hamish, where is your focus? What feels comfortable? And maybe in listening to our bodies more, we also listen when to pull back a little bit and not push ourselves, or vice versa. There's a real kind of being more in tune with what's happening in the body. So if we come to kind of like talking about other elements of the lesson, one of the things that strikes me in this lesson is the stress signature piece. I've always made sure that whatever I did in this lesson, no matter how compressed sometimes the time can be, that I've taken some time over what is their stress signature like and getting them to, and I definitely use the handouts. This I don't want people to feel like they've got to talk about that necessarily, but just really taking some time to consider how it shows up for them. How about you?
I'm the same. I do exactly the same. What I do is when we're in a circle, passing the shot ball round, when we pause, because lots of times just to pause, notice your breathing, allow yourself to breathe fully, feeling your feet on the floor, etc., etc. I just go around and say, right, just if there's one place where you really notice your stress signature, where is it? And that's really interesting. Going around, shoulders, fingers, breath, legs, feet, whatever, and going round. It also brings attention to the different ways that people feel stress. Hamish, is similar with you?
Similar. I think I revisit I'd probably say myself, the stress signature before and after the shock potato. So, I mean, the first one's a bit slightly more academic because they're thinking what they're saying in relation to thoughts, what the stress signature is. And then so they may have an initial first draft of their stress signature. But then I suppose once they really embody it with the shock potato or the stress ball experience, it gives them a much more embodied, visceral sense of what it actually probably is in relation to not a thought difficulty, but an actual real difficulty, although albeit said quite a mild one. And I think it's really interesting to see, well, has it changed, or is it the same, or are there new things there, or have some things been reinforced? I think it's quite, so by revisiting it a second time, it's quite useful opportunity.
And we were talking earlier, I know, about whether or not we use that opening slide about shit happens. Do you want to say more about how it is with your groups, Richard?
Yeah, I do use it, but then I'm teaching year 10. Hamish, I suppose I like it because it has a bit of an impact, and I don't swear, so it's quite, and I will say, look, I don't say this very often, but, and then they go, oops, I mean, what I mean? I'm not, I wouldn't say quite like that, but you know what I mean? It does create a bit of an impact, I think. Hamish?
Yes, no, I use it. I think, I suppose, the cultural norms are changing rapidly in our society anyway. So it's we're probably lucky it's only as mild as the shit word.
Yes, no, exactly. And I'm not saying they don't swear, by the way. Just
I know, but yeah, I do. But again, that was with older. I think maybe with the younger ones, with our S1s, which I suppose that's your year 7, is that I suppose. I might not.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, no, similar. I wouldn't use it with year 7, but maybe with older students I would. And I have had the situation where I've had kind of boys in particular who've seen it as permission to start saying, oh, well, if it's on the board, let us all start swearing. Yeah. But just to share that I have worked in quite tough groups and schools at times. So that's also part of that experience for me.
Talking about other aspects of the lesson, Faiy, I think the animation works really well in this one. And I'm not saying all our animations do, actually, but this one I really, really back in terms of it really enhances the lesson because they can relate to this character walking in, particularly when they're older, they can relate to this character walking into an exam situation, seeing a paper on the desk in front of them. The paper rises up and turns into a tiger, and then the fight, flight, freeze, and then you've got the brain part, which describes that. I think Martin Pickles, who did the animations, really brought that to life with the pulsing amygdala. And then also the butterflies, you've got the butterflies in the chest. And then when the character sits up and feels their feet on the floor, the butterflies all disperse. I just think it really does a lovely job.
Yeah, I agree. And I just love the fact that, there's less neuroscience in .B than there is in Pools B, but I really think it's very powerfully kind of shown in this particular animation. So I agree. It really hits home. Anything else then from this lesson?
I was good in relation to what follows on from the animation, which is part of the home practice that we go away with, because that shows that same video, which is excellent. But then the meditation or the practice goes on to look at holding a little bit of difficulty and just in a very light way. And I suppose having the luxury of more lessons in which to teach the .B, I have actually used a version of that lightly, and I'm aware of being trauma aware with guiding it and knowing the students, just delving a little bit into what it is to sit with a little bit of relatively light difficulty with the metaphor of you can come off and ground yourself at any point. You don't have to stay on that bus. You can allow that bus to pass. But I think especially with older students, if you know them well, there's an opportunity just to, lean a little bit into that and see what, the soft and hard edge of that difficulty. I'm aware you have to be sensitive to how that is dealt with and compassionate in how that is dealt with too. I think it's an opportunity which might be there if you had a bit more time.
I was going to say, if I've got time for just a couple of other little things which I find, I do stick to the script on this one, which you'll see in the next one. I really don't. But in this one, I love the image of the child with the snake. And in the very first versions, before we had the animations, we were actually going to use that as a cover for this lesson, but we didn't because the resolution of the image wasn't high enough. But I love the way the child's face is so open and so curious, and the way they are literally turning towards the snake, and they hold the snake in such a gentle way. I think it's a lovely image of what this lesson is about.
Yeah, and I have had mixed reactions to that, just because I've had some students who've had really phobic reactions to the snake. It's been a good opportunity, actually, truthfully. So even though I, out of kindness, have moved on quickly from that slide, just then said, well, okay, here it is now. What can we do to help ourselves? So, and guide them through a little .b as a way of just supporting themselves with what's happened. So it's almost like it preempts what's about to happen in the lesson, but it's and it's interesting, isn't it, how it's just different with different students.
I mean, it feels like it wouldn't be right not to mention The Guest House, because The Guest House is such a legendary poem in adult mindfulness training, and I think it works really well with our kids in .b. I guess what I would say is it serves a slightly different purpose in a classroom, because I think because it's a poem and you've just done an activity which has got them all wound up and quite hyper, it's quite nice, even if they don't really do what they're supposed to do on the worksheet, that they read it. And it just kind of calms them a little bit, I find, before the end of the lesson. You're not letting them out into the corridor feeling completely crazy for the next poor teacher that has them.
Yeah, for me, it's been really determined whether or not how that has gone with the shot ball and my really brilliant timing or not with my lesson, whether or not I've managed to pull it in time enough to have read The Guest House at the end. So just and some of that can be down to the excitement of the students having done the shot ball and their sharing about how that was for them. So some of that kind of what we call the sort of like sitting by the fire time. But that in itself is quite calming, is to just, there's a little bit of coming down, processing that comes through, that bit of exploration that happens after the shot ball. But I agree, I love that poem. I like it when I get a chance to talk about it with the students. Okay, so thank you both.
Thank you, Faiy.
Everything that you've shared. Thank you for all the work you're continuing to do with this. And we shall see you next week.
Brilliant. Great to see you again as well, Hamish.
Thanks, Aaron. Really nice to see you again.